to follow up, nothing is off the table for this task force. We will consider anything, one of which is public funding. Now, whether that will occur, whether we end up suggesting that or not, or limiting it to public funding, Jim is right. The recent Supreme Court decisions and the Sixth Circuit are really turning judges into politicians. I don't think that's a good idea, but I mean, it is the law. And I say that especially because we've all seen how mean-spirited campaigning has become, and it's just a matter of time with a significant amount of money that it'll happen in judicial races too. So it's a big concern. It's a concern for us.
So far, so good. Thank you very much. You've done an excellent job. But I don't know how many judicial candidates have said to me on occasion, I'm sorry, I can't answer your question because of the judicial canons. Do they exist? What are they?
You don't expect a bunch of lawyers to know the law, do you?
Yeah, I mean, the answer to this question is it's evolving right now in Ohio. And it is evolving because of this Minnesota v. White case that came out a number of years ago. But Minnesota v. White essentially went straight to the heart of electing judges and whether or not they can act as ordinary politicians, whether they have the right to make commitments, whether they have the right to announce their views on things, their views not just on cases and controversies that will appear in front of them, but even on issues. And you can think of all the hot button issues that most candidates talk about. And in the past, we have prevented judges from speaking about that. And the U.S. Supreme Court says that's not consistent with the First Amendment. And in some ways, some of these judges are saying, if you're going to elect judges, if you're going to do that, if you're going to go down that path, you got to pay attention to the First Amendment. And then you got to deal with it, and you got to deal with the consequences. So it's evolving right now. This Sixth Circuit case is a very important case for Ohio. I know it's being looked at, and Tim, you may have something more to add on this.
Ma'am, first of all, the canons do exist, but in light of the decisions, the canon's been unloaded somewhat.
But I'm pumped.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be clever other than to try and be clever, but it is changing significantly. It is going to be very difficult for a candidate for a judgeship to be able to use that line. Prior to this, it wasn't a line. We were stuck with that. It is opening up free speech. It could get as bad as I'm a businessman. I've always been a businessman. I'm a union guy. I've always been a union guy. And when I'm on the bench, I'm not going to change. I mean, it could get that bad. It isn't there yet, but with the First Amendment decisions, that the canons are unloaded.
Yes.
The speakers have pointed out today that on recent occasions, Ohio voters have overwhelmingly turned down efforts to change the entire method of selecting judges from general electing them to an appointive method. And yet, throughout the country, there are a number of states, diversified, some big, some small, industrial, non-industrial, which have changed their systems and have provided for judges being appointed under some kind of a merit system. What is there about Ohio voters, you think, that makes them so reluctant to change our system? And is that carved in stone, or is that one possibility you might still want to look at as a possible change of our method of determining who shall be the judges?
Yeah. We'll let Mike start with his answer.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know why it is that voters have resoundingly defeated merit selection in Ohio on at least 2 occasions. But I do know this. I mean, it has happened, and these defeats were not by small margins. It might have something to do with the fact that people, when given the choice, frequently do not choose to deprive themselves of the right to vote. But I don't know. But as a result of that, I I paid a lot of attention to it when I constituted this task force. And while Jim and Judge McMonigal are right, there are few shackles on them in terms of how they proceed with their endeavor. One thing that I've been clear about from the get-go, and you remember I talked about this in my opening remarks, I said, what realistically can be done about this? Merit selection is off the table. I think that if they came back with a recommendation that we embrace merit selection and start working towards that this will have been a colossal waste of time and we will be spinning our wheels. But let me be clear about something. Merit selection and judicial excellence do not necessarily go hand in glove. I believe that we can achieve judicial excellence within the framework that we have to work, and we do not need merit selection to get there. So that is not something that this task force is going, if they do, they can do whatever they want. If they come back to this Bar Association with that as the ultimate recommendation, it will be a big disappointment to me, and it will be very different than what they were asked to do.
Let me add one other point, because you've asked a very good question. In fact, if you read the New York Times, I think it was last weekend, they had a very long article about judges, Supreme Court judges in Iowa, where they do retention, merit selection, retention elections out there. And there is enormous controversy out there right now because I think that court voted for gay marriage. I think that's the issue. And as a result, people are activated and are actively going after judges who were selected on merit selection. And they were saying that you become insular in a merit selection. You are not directly accountable to the voters, and so they're going after them, spending a lot of money in that retention system. And the New York Times article is about how there's no silver bullet here. You do elect judges or you do merit selection. Neither one is particularly great, and both of them have their drawbacks. I like this quote when we were doing all this studying, Tim and I, to come up with this. Two professors of law from Duke, looking at the Ohio system, wrote this. I think this is a very telling quote. A chief justice of another state not long ago declared that there is no method of selecting and retaining judges that is worth a damn. He is not the first to express that wisdom. However, although there may be no good method of selecting and retaining judges, there is a worst method, and Ohio is among the states to have found it. That worst method is one in which judges qualify for their jobs by raising very large sums of money from lawyers, litigants, and special interest groups, and retain their offices only by continuing to raise such funds. So at least some outsiders look at us and say, we have found the worst system.
All I would say is that you have an interesting idea. There's actually three systems that are available: totally election, totally alleged merit, and then these hybrid systems. And the hybrid system is there is an appointing authority after a vetting, but at the first possibility, usually at least 2 years, there is a retention election. So most of the states that do have merit selection also have a retention election, which used to be a slam dunk unless the individual had done something pretty spectacular. They were reelected. Jim points out that in Iowa, the mere fact that they voted a certain way on a legal issue released the hounds, so to speak, and it has become a real political race. So the merit selection system has not totally been proven to be any more effective because most of them have a retention election as part of it.
But good question.
Great question.